Hello, my name is Dr. Kate Ringham. I'm the Programme Lead for Applied Accounting in Oxford Brookes Business School at Oxford Brookes University. And this video is looking at secondary research and some of the things you might need to consider if you're intending to use secondary data for your research and analysis project. So what do we mean by secondary research? Well, secondary research, or the use of secondary data, is where we collect publicly available information to inform your analysis and evaluation. And in terms of the topics, each of the topics in the information pack, we'll make it very clear what type of data we expect you to use. So secondary research, or the use of publicly available information, would be expected for the new topics 4, 5 and 8, possibly topic 12 or 17 or 20. Please remember the old topic 8 has been withdrawn, and we do have some new research topics in that area. There's a separate video talking about those changes, so please do check that out on the channel. And in terms of thinking about your organisation, one of the considerations needs to be how much information is available. So in order to do analysis and evaluation of publicly available information, there needs to be some information. So if you choose a very small company, or possibly a state-owned company, you may find there isn't a lot of publicly available information, and you're making your job quite hard. So it's worth a quick check in Google or another search engine to see how much information there is about your organisation before you decide on that particular company. So when we're thinking about sources of information for secondary data, where might that come from? Well, it's likely to come from the internet, so web sources are particularly useful. You may find information in press commentary, so news reports. Your study texts are a valuable source of information, particularly around accounting models and theories. You may be able to access some academic articles via open access. You don't currently have access to the Oxford Brookes Library, so academic articles are more difficult to find, and the research topic and the research report has been designed to not require a lot of academic articles. You don't need to use lots of academic articles. You do need to use accounting models and theories, but it's perfectly acceptable to find those in your study text. The assessment criteria states that you need to use at least 2 different types of sources of information. So it might be the study text and the internet, or newspaper reports and the annual report. But if you rely very heavily on just the annual report, then it's likely to result in a fail, because you're not actually presenting lots of different information to help support your argument. So the annual report is a good source of information, but it needs to be supplemented with other sources of information. So how do we know whether a source of information is good? Do we know whether it's useful? Well, the first question I would ask myself is the source reputable? Where is the information coming from? Is it government information? Is it a trusted commentator? You might think about who is it written for. So is it written for the investor community? Is it written for people who are going to be taking that information very seriously? You might then think about when was it written. So if you're using information that is very old to try and explain current events, then it's going to be less useful and less relevant. And then the final thing to think about is what potential bias is there in information? Everybody writes for a reason. So the information that is presented is being presented for a reason. And one of the things that we do as researchers is think about what that reason is, and therefore we can take it into consideration when we evaluate the information. So when we're thinking about sources, quality sources for models and other information, think about what's appropriate. So it needs to be appropriate for your topic. Think about good quality sources. So academic sources such as textbooks and the textbooks provided by your learning provider are very relevant. Open source academic articles are very relevant too. And there is a separate website that academics use called Google Scholar. So scholar.google is a source of academic information. Information that you should try and avoid using is information from Wikipedia, UK Essays, or any site that is offering pre-prepared material. So a pre-prepared SWOT or a pre-prepared PEST. Please do not use those pre-prepared documents. The work that you submit to Oxford Brookes needs to be your own work. There is a suggested structure for a RAP using secondary data in the information pack, and there are a couple of questions that we're asking you to address. So we ask you to think about what secondary sources you have used and why. And we're suggesting you avoid the generalized description here and think about on the sources that you've used. So what we're really thinking about here is justification. Justify the nature of your sources. Have you used in your argument information about demand? Have you used maybe government statistics to help make an argument about demand? And then why are government statistics a particularly good type of secondary data? Well, it might be that they are likely to be reliable or that they are collected on a consistent basis. You might be using trade body information. You might think there about whether or not the trade body itself is seeking to promote the industry in a particular light. Is there any potential there for bias? And of course, one of the sources you will use is the annual report. But remember, the annual report is presented by the company for the purpose of reporting to shareholders, and so may not address other stakeholders. And then another question that we ask is to justify and discuss the limitations of the method that you've used. Well, if you've used secondary research or the use of secondary data, you need to think about, well, what are the advantages of using secondary data? Well, it's time efficient, there's no need to negotiate access or permission. But there are some limitations too. The data that you're collecting has not been collected directly for the purpose of research, and there may be bias in the secondary data that you're using. Please also remember to keep information about where you find your sources, because you will need to reference your sources. And why do we reference? Well, in the academic world, we need to acknowledge the words, ideas and work of others, and not simply present them as if they were our own. So every time we're using a source, we are using other people's ideas. So a top tip is, as you start collecting your data, every time you download an article or a piece of information from the internet, save that URL. You will need it when it comes to referencing. So in terms of next steps, if you are thinking about secondary data, check that information is available for your organisation. So do that quick Google search on your company. Is there enough information? Then find lots of information. Different sources, different points of views. That will make your evaluation and analysis rich and detailed. You will need to consider the models and accounting theory to help you evaluate the information. There's a separate video on that, and you will need to reference all your sources. There will be a video coming on referencing. So please do subscribe to the channel and make sure you keep up to date with all the new videos. Thank you very much.